The very definition of insanity is to continue to do the same thing over and over, get the same result, but expect change. Welcome to No Crime, No Time. I'm Danny, also known as RD, and this is your Blackout. We've kind of talked a little bit about how David Remiker's role highlighted the way he worked. So when we go back to the investigation and we look at David Remiker's role as a lead investigator with both Carmen and Teresa, whether they're related or not, when it comes down to DNA switching, if that really did happen, then the Halbach DNA would never appear in the case. The replacement DNA of Carmen Boutwell would have been used through it all. So Teresa's DNA would not matter at all until we got to the mitochondrial DNA of Karen Halbach, the mother of Teresa. At this point, it's quite clear that the FBI could not confirm that it was a match. On the mitochondrial DNA, we could only acquire that Teresa could not be ruled out as a match to the mother. Unfortunately, that gets us nowhere with Halbach's DNA. So we really want to look at this role where this lead investigator, Remiker, has both girls' DNA within 7 miles of crime scenes, both homicide, and how much Remiker put that it was an overdose, almost like it was a chosen path by the victim, when really it was Luchterhand, Captain Luchterhand of the Manitowoc County Police, very clearly stated in an interview in a local paper that Carmen Boutwell's homicide was seen as a true homicide, and that let's go back up and remember. I'll actually quote it. I like to do my research, but I do encourage you to do your own research. That's why I do these blackouts. Let's see, where did we get that? So, quoting the local newspaper at the time of Carmen Boutwell's death, it said her death was one of the first local cases of a young person overdosing on prescription drugs, the start of what grew to become a rash of area drug-related deaths, said Captain Scott Luchterhand of the Manitowoc Police Department. Botwell didn't have a prescription for methadone. Somebody provided those drugs to her. This case remains open. If new evidence is obtained, the suspect could face a charge of first-degree reckless homicide, Luchterhand said. And it went on to say in the same article regarding Carmen's death, Dave Remiker is quoted as saying, "It's like finding a needle in a haystack and then obtaining enough evidence to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt is the standard we're held to." This statement by Remiker has never left my mind since I read that. It makes me ask, who in their right mind would refer to a drug-related homicide of a young woman as a needle in the haystack? But the last part of the statement he says, I believe, is even more telling when he says, obtaining enough evidence to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. Think about that. Obtaining enough evidence to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. It seems like a normal comment by an active lead investigator. But if you really think about the possibility of the cross meaning of his statement, perhaps he was voicing a concern of not being able to find or obtain enough evidence to plant in the Avery case when it came to Carmen. Now remember, her remains have to be handed back to the family. Now, close family friends have said that those remains were returned almost a month after her cremation. That's not standard. That is way, way later. I recently had someone very dear to us pass, and she was cremated, and it was 2 weeks, and that was 2 weeks at the most. So a month, that's a lot. You know, it's weird, Harold. The whole thing, it all kind of works together. So we're going to be talking tonight about Dr. Seisman and where Remiker comes into play with this quote unquote candyman of prescription drugs that was feeding the streets. Okay. So in about 2015, Remiker was interviewed about this Dr. Seisman. And Dr. Seisman was a doctor in Manitowoc accused of overprescribing painkillers, methadone, that was possibly linked to numerous drug-related deaths in the county. So again, we're going to the same newspaper, and it's a report by Captain Scott Luchterhand. And it says, he quotes this is his words. He's referring to this Dr. Seisman. Quote, he's known in our community as a drug dealer with a license. He's also considered the candyman by the people out on the street that are abusing all these prescriptions. Luchterhand went on to say, law enforcement has been familiar with Dr. Charles Seisman's reputation for at least 15 years. So he's saying this in 2015. That means they've known since what, 2000? And again, in the same interview with this Dr. Charles Seisman in the same paper, we've got 10 years later, Dr. Remiker, paging Dr. Remiker. We need some evidence over here on aisle 3. Clean up on aisle 3, replacement DNA, please. Anyway, sorry about that. I had a moment. It's a Gemini thing. Don't worry about it. Okay, 10 years later, Dave Remiker and Captain Luchterhand are both in the same interview again, only this time it's about this Dr. Charles Seisman. And Remiker is quoted as saying the ongoing investigation between Metro Drug and the DEA, which began in the summer of 2013, included using undercover agents as patients, along with interviewing Seisman and others. In an affidavit submitted to the Medical Examining Board as part of the petition for suspension, Remiker said he had consistently received information that Seisman was prescribing mass quantities of narcotics, specifically opioid pain medications. Remiker also stated in the affidavit, a deputy coroner said that on some occasions, the medicine amounts prescribed by Seisman would, quote, physically impossible to consume by a normal person without resulting in complete incapacitation or death. Now, another question that comes to mind is if Lieutenant Dave Remiker, the supervisor of the Metro Drug Unit, was aware of Dr. Charles Seisman's reputation as a Manitowoc County, quote, drug dealer with a license, also known as the candyman by the people on the street, then why didn't he investigate Dr. Seisman's pharmaceutical prescription records as an obvious lead in Botwell's murder? I mean, according to Luchterhand, law enforcement had been aware for over 5 years by 2005 that Dr. Seisman was the go-to doctor for possibly obtaining deadly quantities of prescription painkillers. Honest to God. And you have to ask yourself, these undercover patients, I mean, I'm going to go out on a wild theory here. Now, keep in mind, Carmen Boutwell has no license. She is due in court on the day of her death at 8:30 in the morning. She is pronounced dead at 9:08 a.m., according to her autopsy report. And this isn't somebody just calling time of death. Her autopsy was performed on the 4th. They used her body to determine the time of death. So 9:08 a.m. is on the autopsy. Yeah, isn't it weird, like that call? Before we even get into this other stuff, I've like even forgot where I was going. That happens like squirrel. But isn't it weird, like that? I'm trying to think. It was Colborne, and I'm looking for my notes. Colborne called in and he was asking about the 25-year-old dead girl found in Mishka. Was it Halbach? Something along that lines, remember? And she's like, no, only because it was my neighbor, right? That's what the dispatcher said. No, we had two. And only because it was my neighbor. Isn't that strange that this dispatcher is the neighbor? And yet Carmen's found by quote unquote some unknown female. And didn't she say that dispatcher tell Colborne that the Mishka girl was not Halbach and that the Mishka girl was found at 8:30 in the morning? I don't know if you guys are doing the timeline math here with me, but Carmen wasn't dead till 9:08 a.m. How soon did Remiker get to Carmen's? And Carmen has no license. It's been suspended, but she's got to go to court. And she's supposed to be there very shortly. Was Remiker like, I'll pick you up? Was she possibly, were they trying to, because we know that Carmen was with either DCI or DEA in that meeting where Grandma had to take her because Carmen couldn't drive. And when Carmen got done with the meeting at this out-of-way place, she got out of that law enforcement vehicle and she was really upset. And it's even been stated by close family friends that Carmen was frantically saying, they're going to kill me. You don't get it. I'm serious. They're going to kill me. And family thought she was freaking out, like losing her shit. But Carmen was pleading for help. So where the hell did she go after October 31st until she was found dead? Where was she? Is it possible? I'm just throwing wild shit, seeing what sticks to the wall here. But is it possible that she was not wanting to act as one of these patients for an undercover? I'm just saying, it doesn't say that any of these undercover agents had any training whatsoever. It doesn't say police officers, just calls them agents. And could Dave Remicker have said, hey, I know you got to get to court, Carmen. I'll head over and I'll pick you up and take you to court? Because really, honestly, how early was he really at Carmen's? That's my question for you. I'm here to get you thinking outside the box because what we've been doing hasn't been working. And we've got to think outside the box. And we've got to really look at this situation. What did Remicker play in this investigation role? And whose team was he on? Was he on the team of justice? Or was he on Manitowoc, quote, I hate Steven Club agenda? Think of his connections to this case. Who was his boss? Everybody's like, remember that saying, the boss has something he wants us to do. Well, if you're talking about Remicker, the guy that hired him is the same guy that arrested and went targeting Steven in 1985. And that boils down to the syrups cooking in the kitchen, Mr. Kusurik. I love ya to the moon and back.